All right, man, peace. You know, brothers, it's so strange. So much of how we view life is based on perception. And so much of our perceptions are based on how the figures that we're trying to evaluate or assess are depicted before us. Like, for example, you know, when I was a kid, one of my favorite TV shows was Saved by the Bell. As I'm sure that was the favorite TV show of most of you brothers in my age range. That show was a sensation from the late 80s into the early 90s. My point being is that you had three female characters on the show. That being the character of Kelly Kapowski, who basically was the quote-unquote sex goddess archetype or Aphrodite. You had the character of Jessie, who basically was the goddess of wisdom archetype or Minerva, aka Athena. And then you also had the gossip, that being the character of Lisa Turtle, who basically played the quote-unquote Greek goddess archetype of Fama, or the goddess of gossip, the goddess of the news. And of course, Zack, Slater, and Screech, they also played their archetypes as well. I'll probably be evaluating that show down the line, but not to digress, please understand that all sitcoms that are developed, the characters are based on the original character archetypes that were laid out in the stories of the Greco-Roman pantheon, which come from the Etruscan pantheon, which come from the Assyrian, which come from the Neo-Babylonian, which come from the ancient Akkadian/Sumerian, what we call the ancient Babylonian or Kemetic mystery school system. It all comes from the same thing. That's why you see the same character types or the same character archetypes over and over. But just to get to the point of this video, so much of how we perceive things are based on how they're depicted before us, right? Now, in the TV show Saved by the Bell, the character of Kelly Kapowski was depicted as being the one who was the most attractive. And she was a very attractive young lady, but she was no more attractive than the character played by Elizabeth Berkley of Jessie or the character played by Lark Voorhees of Lisa Turtle. It's just that Kelly Kapowski's character played by Tiffany Amber Thiessen was depicted in a certain way. So that's how we perceived her. If they would have depicted Elizabeth Berkley's character in a different way, we would have perceived her a different way. Now, just to take that analogy to today's NBA, LeBron James is depicted a certain way, so we perceive him a certain way. Kevin Durant is depicted a certain way, so we perceive him a certain way. If the media was always inundating us with this propaganda about Kevin Durant being the greatest small forward of all time or the greatest player of all time, we would perceive him differently as opposed to how they depict him. They love to tell us about how Michael Jordan and Tom Brady, they take the littlest slight, the smallest perceived insult, and turn it into a diatribe, turn it into a vendetta, and that meant that they were super competitive. But when it comes to Kevin Durant, when he'll take a slight or a jab and make a big deal out of it, or even just address it, they'll say, well, he's super sensitive. You see how altered depiction can alter your perception? That's why we have to make sure that our thoughts are our own. Well, Kevin Durant decided that he was going to sit down with Miss Rachel Nichols and lay the cupboard bare, basically just give his own understanding pertaining to why things are how they are when it comes to him. Of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
I sat down with Kevin Durant before Saturday's showdown against the Lakers. Let me say a little of our conversation, but I wanted to show you a lot more that you didn't see. Here's the extended version with the two-time Finals MVP. Enjoy. So James Harden was traded to Brooklyn in January. It's April now. You, James, Kyrie Irving have only played 7 games together. Do you see any potential issues rising come playoff time from...
Let me say this. I do see some potential chemistry issues in the playoffs, especially if they face a team that has their chemistry down pat, like in Milwaukee. The Nets don't want to get down 2-1 or 3-2 to a team like a Milwaukee, a franchise that really has been burning to finally break through into the finals. They appear to be a team that's better than we may have prognosticated them of being. I'm talking about the Milwaukee Bucks. They fit together very well. The Nets want to make sure that their chemistry is relatively down pat by the time they square off against a team like Milwaukee or Philadelphia. Now, just on paper, they have the most overall talented group or grouping of individual offensive stars in the history of the NBA, and I'm not quite sure if it's that close. I think that the last time that there was a 3-man grouping of offensive talent to this caliber, who could still get it done to a degree may have been the late 1960s LA Lakers with Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, and Wilt Chamberlain. And even at that time, Wilt Chamberlain basically took the tertiary role and decided to be more of a defender and a rebounder than a primary scoring option. With this team, you have three guys who can go out there and get you 50 points at any time in any moment. But it also appears that James Harden is going to be the player who takes a step back and casts himself as the distributor. So we'll see how that works in the playoffs.
Getting this regular season work in the way you might normally?
I mean, I don't see more issues if we're not focused, you know what I'm saying? If we're not locked in with the game plan more so than anything.
Well, just to take it a step further, you guys are going to have to be locked in on defense. That's the most crucial thing, as I perceive it to be with the Nets. How close and how glued together are they going to be on defense? Offense shouldn't be too much of a problem as long as James Harden makes sure that they're running their sets relatively seamlessly. Because you're going to have the option of KD, Kyrie, yourself, Joe Harris, etc. And that guy, Mike James, that they just signed from Europe, that dude is going to give them some crucial minutes, some big-time minutes in the playoffs. I can already see it because he has no fear and he has a very high-level skill set. I'm not quite sure if Dinwiddie is going to be available for the playoff roster. I did see that he was still rehabbing, so I'm not quite sure what the update is with him. But the Nets' biggest problems are going to be defense and, of course, rebounding because they don't have much size.
Once we got a good game plan, we follow it to the T, then we'll start to see stuff form, chemistry.
I was very happy to see these two guys come together because, to me, that was going to be the sticking point with this team. We already know that Kyrie was not going to have a problem coming together with KD. We also know that KD has a history and a friendship with James Harden going all the way back to OKC. So the only test for this team in regards to clashing of egos was going to be James Harden and Kyrie Irving. And I think that at this point in their careers, they're coming together at the perfect time because the scenario with James Harden is very similar to the scenario with Shaq when Shaq went to Miami. Shaq knew that he pretty much was the guy who took the fall for the disintegration of his relationship with Penny Hardaway in Orlando. He was the guy who was going to take the fall to a certain degree for the disintegration of his relationship with Kobe Bryant. So he knew that he had to make it work in Miami with D. Wade. In the same way, James Harden knows that at this point in his career at 31, this has to work. So he's already had Dwight Howard, even though Dwight Howard was not quite the player he was in Orlando. That didn't work. He had CP3. That didn't work. He had Russell Westbrook. That didn't work. He knows he has to make this work.
Just the energy form around, us following what the coaches need us to do to succeed. So I think things will work out for us, but we definitely want to get on the floor.
James was spectacular holding it down while you were out. Kyrie was in and out at times. He said at one point, quote, "I feel like I'm the MVP." Who do you think is the MVP?
At the point that he went out with his injury, James Harden was the MVP of the NBA. And it wasn't particularly that close. If we're going to combine productivity with wins. Now, in my view, the real MVP of the NBA is Stephen Wardell Curry. But his team is not going to win enough games. But if you see what he's been able to do this season, if you watch their games like I watched them, this guy's out here averaging 32 points a game, shooting 48.5% from the field, with a cast of characters where the majority of their squad could easily be in the G League. Easily. So in my view, Stephen Curry is the real overall MVP of the NBA. But at the point in the season where James Harden got hurt, he was the actual MVP of the league. As of right now, my vote would go to Jokic because he's had the most consistent and healthy season, as well as resulting in wins of any player in the league. So it has to go to Jokic in my view.
I mean, I really don't care. I mean, I feel as though, the criteria changes every day. And, it's become an award where it's just 7 to 8, 9, 10 guys could win it in a year. You know what I'm saying? So it's like...
Right, but that's always been the case. It's always been the case in the NBA that 7, 8, 9 guys could win the MVP. And this notion that nobody knows the criteria of what it means to be an MVP. I mean, let's stop with that. It's pretty much always been, at least for the last 40 years since the media's been voting on it, the best player on the best team if he has a great season. Now, if you have another player in the NBA who's having an historically great season, or is having, a more impactful season where his PER is that much higher than everyone else's, and his team is still competitive, say a 2 seed, somewhere along those lines, then he might get the MVP. But the voting has been relatively consistent other than 2 years. That being Michael Jordan in '88 when he won the MVP, and his team, I believe, was the 4th seed, when he averaged 35 points a game and shot 54% from the field, was also the Defensive Player of the Year, was the All-Star Game MVP, the Slam Dunk Champion, etc. And he was able to win the MVP that season. I believe he had 200 steals and 100 blocks in the same season in back-to-back years. So they almost had to give it to him because he had an historically great season. And then you also had Russell Westbrook, who they gave the MVP to in 2017. Other than that, it's been pretty much the same thing every year. The player who leads the league in PER and who also happens to be on either the team with the best record in the regular season or maybe second best record. That's how it's always been. That's been the formula for the last 40 years or so. Every once in a while there's a little tinkering with that, but it's not that often. So this season is Jokic. I don't think that it's that difficult to decipher.
I mean, I don't know. What's his story? Can he sell his story outside of his play? There's a lot of stuff that factors into it that really don't really move me.
Really what KD is alluding to is his understanding that he's persona non grata with the media, as are his teammates James Harden and Kyrie Irving. And that's why I call the Brooklyn Nets the basketball version of the movie The Expendables. Basically mercenaries for hire who are the best at what they do, but they're expendable. They're viewed by the NBA as being expendable. If they don't make the finals or even the playoffs, the NBA doesn't mind because those players don't represent the image of what they want their superstars to represent. And obviously he's alluding to LeBron James and his political machinations, his media savvy, the fact that LeBron clearly has multiple media plants out there, as I've been telling you, brothers, for the last 4 years, and other content creators and people out there are finally starting to understand and realize. Whether it be Shannon Sharp, Nick Wright, Colin Cowherd, these are media members that actually fraternize with some of the members of LeBron's circle, whether it be Rich Paul or Maverick Carter. And it's obvious that, some things are being exchanged. There's no doubt about that there are some monies being exchanged. Of course, everything I'm saying is alleged. But KD probably understands these things also, and he's trying to say a lot of these guys might be buying MVPs or at least buying consideration, because every year for the last 5 or 6 years, the mainstream liberal sports media has tried to act like LeBron has been getting robbed of MVP awards, even though he really has no realistic chance of winning. So why is this sentiment constantly being pushed about LeBron, how he should have 5 more MVPs? That's not true. LeBron has 4 MVPs, and you can make a better case that he should have less than what he has.
And at that level, that's really all that matters, is he stays at that elite level. But it's a lot of guys playing that well.
The MVPs.
Kyrie Irving has been playing at an MVP level, but he's missed too many games voluntarily. James Harden has been playing at an MVP level, but he's missed games due to injury, and also there's a lot of bad blood between himself and the media pertaining to how he chose to leave Houston. KD, I thought, was a front runner for MVP maybe like the first 3 weeks, a month of the season, but he got hurt.
About a particular regular season, but then there's sort of that larger question of who is the most dangerous guy in the league right now. Do you feel like you have that crown? Do you feel like something has to happen for you to get that crown?
The most dangerous player in the NBA pound for pound is Stephen Curry, pound for pound. Now, if we want to go and assess actualities, then it's either LeBron or KD. When it comes to players who literally can get out there and score 40 points whenever their team needs it and be efficient from the field. Kawhi Leonard is also a superstar because of his accomplishments, but I do believe that he's taken a step back or a step down in how he's perceived, particularly based on his tenure with the LA Clippers and how he's come up, I won't say small, but short thus far. But he has the opportunity to redeem himself.
I might be the best. At another gym, another guy might be the best. But it's just like, there's millions of gyms around the world, and this conversation is going to always keep happening, and nobody's going to get the title outright. So it's no need for me to even think about it. But I know what I bring to the sport. I know what I bring to the culture of the sport. And I feel like I'm accepted by all the real ones in the game. You know what I'm saying? So that's really all that matters. I get that respect, and that's what I've been playing for. And
that was another shot at Shannon Sharp and Nick Wright and those guys. He said, I'm accepted by the real ones. In other words, you don't necessarily have to call me the best player in the NBA. But when my name is always coming out your mouth, when I'm here in the cut just chilling and not bothering anybody, I know that basically you're enacting the agenda of your sponsor. Your sponsor's telling you to make sure that you get on TV and shit on whoever is perceived as a rival for LeBron James. So that's what you're going to do. That's why you get at Michael Jordan so hard. That's why you get at KD so hard, because your sponsor is making sure that you do those things. That's what KD's talking about. The real ones, meaning the real journalists, the real basketball lovers, they respect what he brings to the table.
I want to continue to play for that.
Elevates and throws it down. My goodness. Carter, Vince Carter.
Now, of course, they're going to go on to discuss KD's admiration and being a quote-unquote fan of Vince Carter back in his youth. There was a moment in time where Vince Carter had the opportunity to receive the mantle of the Michael Jordan of the 2000s, but the fact of the matter is that he didn't want it. And that's the difference between Vince Carter and Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant was not the level of athlete of a Vince Carter. Even though he was an outstanding athlete, he was not the natural raw athlete of a Vince Carter. But mentally, it wasn't even close. Kobe was an alpha through and through. Vince Carter was not. Vince Carter had an alpha physical set. He had an alpha skill set even. But mentally, he was not that guy. When he decided to attend his college graduation on the day of Game 7 against the Philadelphia 76ers, I knew that subconsciously that was his methodology of asking out of that role of being the head of the snake. He didn't want it. And thereafter, he incrementally started to recede into the background. And Kobe Bryant's star started to shine more and more. Because, once again, for a moment, for about a 2-year period, no one knew who was going to be considered the quote-unquote Michael Jordan of the 2000s. Was it going to be T-Mac? Was it going to be Vince Carter? Or was it going to be Kobe? And, of course, to a degree, people were discussing Allen Iverson. But because Vince Carter really didn't want it, and people forget, right after that slam dunk contest in 2001, people were calling him potentially being greater than Michael Jordan. But it was too much pressure. Kobe wanted all the pressure. He wanted all the smoke. And that's what I give him credit for. But had Vince Carter really wanted it, had he had the brain of a Kobe Bryant, he may have been that guy to be able to get to the heights of a Michael Jordan.
Vince Carter with his first shot. Let's go home. Let's go home, ladies and gentlemen.
I want to go back to when you were a kid, because there was a time when your favorite team was the Toronto Raptors. You loved Vince Carter. Is there any Vince Carter in your game? What about your game do you feel you took from Vince?
It would have been very interesting had the Raptors been able to keep T-Mac and kept that team together, what they could have done in the East. Because at that time, heading into the 2000s, there really were not any teams in the Eastern Conference that had two great players. You had the Celtics, they had Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker. But, I mean, there really were not any other teams that were a threat out there. Of course, Cleveland would get LeBron James, and they had Ilgauskas and Larry Hughes. The Wizards, they had Arenas, and I think they had Anton Jameson. But had T-Mac stayed with the Raptors, they could have had a nice little run. Now, the Nets came to the forefront with Jason Kidd and Richard Jefferson and Kenyon Martin, a lot of those guys. But I think that had that Toronto Raptors team been able to stay together and keep those two crucial players, they could have ran the Eastern Conference at least until the mid-2000s. Now, they would have had to butt heads with the Pistons that had Chauncey and Rip Hamilton, Ben Wallace, Rasheed, and those guys. They would have bumped heads with the Milwaukee Bucks that had Ray Allen and Sam Cassell and Glenn Big Dog Robinson. You also had the Indiana Pacers at their latter end with Reggie Miller, and then that team that had Jermaine O'Neal and Ron Artest. But had they stayed together in the East, because those guys were two superstars, or two potential superstar players, I should say. Had they been able to work together, they could have won possibly a championship or two. They may have been able to get one of those championships that Miami was able to sneak in, or Detroit was able to sneak in the early to mid 2000s.
Probably the passion that he plays with. He's a unique player I can't replicate.
Now, do you see that triangle that KD has tatted right in between his index finger and his thumb? KD has entered into the craft, and his mentor is none other than Mr. Kyrie Irving. I'll probably be covering that in another series. At one time, KD was the guy with the Bible in his in his backpack, in his book bag. Remember that? When he was trying to be perceived as a quote-unquote nice guy. But he just shook off that attempt at a depiction and has just embraced his, I won't say his dark side per se, but beyond a shadow of a doubt, he is an alchemist, or a wannabe alchemist, and he is into the esoteric understandings, and Kyrie is his mentor. James Harden is as well, by the way. And once again, everything I'm saying is alleged.
But the passion that stood out to me when I watched him after he dunked, after he made a big shot, and how much he loved to play. You could tell he was excited, and that just.
And by the way, for those of you who don't know, the triangle represents the quote-unquote divine feminine. Now, the triangle as the capstone also represents Horus or Heru, and that's why they're always depicted together as the quote-unquote divine mother and the divine child. But the triangle is the delta. It's the quote-unquote doorway, the portal from the spiritual world to the physical world. That's why the woman and her genitals are worshipped, because the vagina looks like an inverted triangle, and it is the portal or the doorway for the child to enter into the physical world.
Made me go out there and be more free as a player when I was a kid. So I'm just like, if he expressing himself like that, I think I can too,
And then now you got players coming into the league, like the #1 overall pick, Anthony Edwards, said that you were that guy for him. You were his favorite player. You were the guy he wanted to be like.
Karl Anthony Towns said the same thing. So KD been in the league a while. I think KD's first year was what? The 06-07 season? That dude been in the league for like 15 years, man. That's crazy.
How does that make you feel to hear that?
Old, for one, but I've been in the league for over 10 years now, so I'm 12.
Closer to 15, KD. Don't be trying to cut corners on your career. KD came into the NBA either in 06 or 07. So he's been in the league now going on 13, 14 years.
Years older than some of these guys, and now to see them, watch me when they were in elementary school and middle school is pretty cool, man. Because I was one of them kids, So hopefully I'm setting a good example about how I approach the game, and hopefully I keep inspiring people to play and watch the game.
KD has the same body right now that he had at 10 years old. His arms are the same. They're the same in diameter as when he was 10 years old. That's crazy. Let me rewind this back a little bit. Now look at this shit. KD has the same size arms now as he had at 10 years old.
Play and watch the game.
Your mom, Wanda, the real MVP to the rest of America. She's probably...
Now, of course, that's an allusion to Kevin Durant's legendary MVP speech. But the reason why she said what she said is because, once again, they love to reinforce that female dominance and that black matriarchy on the so-called black man. That's how they keep him under control.
In the building for thousands of your games at this point, but what is it about the relationship between you two that makes it feel just kind of special every single time?
We had this conversation the other night, and it was just like, when I was a kid, I was telling her, like, I could hear you in these gyms, you know what I'm saying? When, as a 8, 9 years old, you're the loudest person in these gyms, and I was embarrassed as a kid, because she was screaming at me, telling me what to do. But as I got older, I was like, you know what? I enjoyed having my mom supporting me as much as she did, no matter if she was critiquing me or no matter if she was, encouraging me. Just having her there, having her presence there, always meant a lot to me. So now when I see her at the game, I'm just looking over there like, you go, girl, I see you. I see you over there shining.
There's a lot of talk when you and Kyrie and James first got together, people wringing their hands, talking about the personalities involved, or will there be enough ball on offense? It has been seamless.
Well, not quite seamless. What has helped is that James Harden is an elite level distributor. and he understands, and he was able to properly read Kyrie Irving's ego. Kyrie has a massive ego, and James Harden understood, look, there's not going to be a debate here over who's going to run the point, because the fact of the matter is that Kyrie does not have great distribution skills because he doesn't have a great distribution mindset. As a passer, Kyrie is a great passer. He just does not have the mindset of a distributor. While James Harden, on the other hand, does. He's great at the top of the key. And James really is not great off the ball. He hasn't had to utilize off-the-ball skills in such a long time that he's kind of lost that feel. So it just works out perfectly that he is the distributor and Kyrie plays as the quote-unquote shooting guard. But to say that it's been seamless, I wouldn't go there thus far. They need more time together.
I think it has worked not just well, but so well between the three of you.
I think our experiences with Team USA definitely help, because when you're in that environment, I wouldn't say you have to shrink yourself, but you have to really have to check your ego and figure out when you need to use it. You know what I'm saying? We hold each other accountable when stuff happens. I think that's one of the things that helped us, learn how to play with each other. Because the second James got here, he was pulling us to the side, telling us, different things he sees out on the floor. So I think our IQ for the game and our, communication has helped us thus far.
It's so interesting. It's different on every team, right? But when guys really trust each other and then they get in each other's faces, everyone takes it as a good thing. There are times you can be on a team where a guy's getting in your face and you start to feel some kind of way about it. How do you guys make sure it's the first version on your team?
Because they've all matured. KD is 32, going on 33 years old. James is like 31, going on 32. Kyrie's in his late 20s. At this point, they don't have enough time in their careers to fall out over nonsense. At the end of the day, time is of the essence. James has to prove that he can win a championship, because if James Harden is able to win, say, 2 championships with the Nets, and he were to win a Finals MVP or even 2 Finals MVPs, suddenly we have to start speaking about him as a top 20 all-time great player because of all of his individual accomplishments already. It's a very short list of players who've not only won a regular season MVP, but have finished second or third 5 or 6 other times. Like, that list is very, very small. I mean, when we think of James right now, Harden right now is a top 30 all-time great player, no doubt about it. But if he wins 2 or 3 championships, now we have to start speaking about him as a top 15 all-time great player. Definitely top 20, beyond a shadow of a doubt, but top 15, he's right there with the Isaiah Thomases, with the Dr. J's, with the Oscar Robertsons. When you look at a player who's averaged over 30 points a game multiple times, who's averaged over 35 points a game in a season, who's led the league in assists, I mean, that's where James would fall. So James knows this is not the time to get into frivolous beefs with teammates. KD is trying to prove that he can win championships outside of Golden State, and that maybe he can end his career with more championships than LeBron. Kyrie's trying to prove that he can win championships without LeBron, and that he should have his name mentioned with the Steph Currys. So all of their goals revolve around winning right now. So that's why they fit together so well. Had they come together in their early 20s, like on OKC, they wouldn't have worked. Because Harden needed to go out and spread his wings and show what he could do. Deep down, even though Russ wanted KD to stay, there was a certain component of him that wanted him to leave so that he could show the world what he could do as the top guy without someone to be submissive unto. So that team had 3 MVPs. That 2012 OKC team had 3 players who were going to win MVP. I'm not quite sure if we've ever seen that in the history of the NBA.
I mean, we don't have guys that take things personal. We understand we're playing a game. We understand that life is also bigger than this. So, like, if I'm telling you to, like, get your ass in the corner, it's not that I don't like you. It's just that's what we need for this play to work. You know what I'm saying? And I think everybody understands that on this team. And we all like hearing that from each other.
Well, we get to listen in on you guys sometimes. With you especially, you've really taken control of the media that you do. You've got your podcast. You had Draymond Green on this week. Steve Kerr's recent comments, they came up too on that podcast. Steve had talked about how draining it was to coach the Warriors in 2018, which is, of course, your last year there, compared to coaching the team the year after. Now, Steve was upset later. He said that his comments were kind of oversimplified. You tweeted about them, though. You said, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Now that you've had a minute to hear everything.
You could tell that KD does not like Steve Kerr. You could tell that he views Steve Kerr as being a complete actor and a phony. I'm sure that he knows a lot more than us common folk know, and it'll probably be revealed down the line exactly who Steve Kerr is, at least in the eyes of KD.
I think everything. What's your take on all that?
I mean, I just don't believe that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you rather come into a game knowing you're going to lose, you know what I'm saying, rather than come into a game knowing you got a great chance to win. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, even though, like, you try to frame it as if, like, the mental side of coaching this team and that team, but it's just, like, not really, because you rather win games than lose games, you know, when you simplify it like that. So I just thought it was funny. And Steve is not a bad person for saying that, but I just thought it was one of those things that, you know, he probably didn't mean to say.
In other words, KD is saying that Steve Kerr is so full of shit, sometimes even the toilet overflows. I think all Steve meant was that, you know what, and this is something that regularly happens with liberal Caucasians. They think that when they swoop down and they show the so-called black man a higher way or a better way of doing things, that in return, they should be the recipient of that so-called black man's undying gratitude. So to make a long story short, I believe that Golden State was incredulous that he would ever want to leave that environment after, quote unquote, all the things they did for him. Not grasping that he understood that he did as much for them as they ever did for him.
Titles with Golden State. You and I sat down for a combo like this after you won your first ring, and you said something that has stuck with me ever since. You said that you thought winning would tie up some loose ends for you, or that it would be some sort of finish line of all the work you had done for so long. But then you got there and it didn't feel that way. It wasn't like this golden thing that was going to just make you automatically happy.
Because life is not a destination, life is a journey. The destination is death. And even that is not the end. So I think a lot of times, you know, and so much of this was misconstrued by a lot of his haters when he said that he doesn't play for championships. It's obvious to me all KD meant is that he realizes that winning a championship is not the end, that it's the process that counts. And if you adhere to the process, the championships will come.
I wasn't expecting to be a happy human being from a title. I was just expecting, like, you know, the ending of a movie. Once you work so hard and everybody tells you, like, yo, this is what you need to be working for, is this gold ball and these rings. And I'm just like, all right, cool, let me lock in on that. And I locked in on wanting to achieve that, but I also realized it's a lot of stuff that factors in there that's out of my control.
I.e. media narratives, and also the referees, because those two things are linked. The media tells you who the NBA wants to win because the media is locked in to the political world. And a lot of sports is politics. It's based in politics. There's a reason why the National Basketball Association is so inextricably linked to the Democratic Party now, because they're all narrative driven and they get promoted by the mainstream media. So the mainstream media tells us who we're supposed to view as the favorites to win championships. In football, it's either Pat Mahomes or Tom Brady. In basketball, it's LeBron, because LeBron is one of the pawns of the mainstream media and the Democratic Party. So KD knows that in order for anyone to win championships in this, in this time period, as a basketball player, you have to be able to overcome and overwhelm the LeBron James machine. And that's not just about being a better player than him. It's also about being able to overcome the referees, who everyone knows in a close, pivotal game, they're going to give LeBron James's team the benefit of the doubt. So there's a lot that the Brooklyn Nets are going to have to do in order to win a championship this year. KD knows that it's not just going to come down to being the better team. They're going to have to be able to offset the preferential whistles that the referees will be giving to a LeBron James team. Any team that faces the Lakers are going to have to deal with that. Not just how well the Lakers are playing and how great their defense is and how talented LeBron and AD are, but also the refs and the fact that they have a narrative, a script that they want to fulfill.
Won a championship, I realized that, like, yo, my view on this game is really about development. How good can I be? It's not about, let's go get this championship or let's go get this gold ring. It's like, yo, how great can you be every time you step out on the floor? Because dudes who don't do nothing on the court become champions. And dudes who don't contribute at all in any type of form or fashion can run around and hide behind the championship, but like I want to be a great basketball player. And you know, once I won a championship, I'm like, oh, that's what my goal is, just to be great every day, not to be chasing some stuff that the humans created. You know what I'm saying? In a ring or gold ball. And I appreciate that stuff, and I want to win and experience that stuff. But it's not the end all be all. Wow.
Really, all he's saying is that he's not going to allow other people to tell him what he should be shooting for, because they can change the goalpost. They can change the end line, and he doesn't want to be puppeted.
To the game.
Really?
But anyway, that's basically it on that, brothers. We'll see how things go for KD and the Brooklyn Nets over the course of this season. So peace.